25 women left me the moment they thought I had nothing. You're the 26th, and I need to know if you're different." He said it standing in the cold, holding an envelope she had just handed back to him. Every dollar. Returned. Unsigned. She looked at him without flinching. "I don't know anything about 25 women," she said. "But I know I don't take money from a man whose name I barely know, no matter how much I need it." Nathaniel Carter was the richest man in Montana Territory, and he had just met the only woman who made that completely irrelevant. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story all the way to its last word. Then drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The morning Nathaniel Carter rode into Cedar Hollow, he looked like a man the world had already finished with. His boots were cracked along the left heel. His shirt had been washed so many times the blue had faded to something closer to gray. He sat on a good horse, the one thing he could not bring himself to disguise, but he rode with his hat pulled low and his eyes down, the way a man rides when he does not want to be recognized. Nobody in Cedar Hollow recognized him. That was exactly the point. He paid for a room at Hester Boone's boarding house with coins. He counted out slowly, one by one the way a man counts when he is not sure he has enough. Hester watched him without expression. She had seen worse come through her door. She gave him the small room at the back, the one with the window that faced the alley, and the mattress that sagged in the middle, and she did not ask questions. Nathaniel set his saddlebag on the floor, sat on the edge of that sagging mattress, and stared at the wall. He was 34 years old. He owned 11,000 acres of the finest ranch land in Montana Territory. He had more money in the Helena First National Bank than most men in this county would see in 3 lifetimes, and he was completely, utterly alone. He reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a small leather journal. The cover was worn soft from handling. He opened it to the last written page and read the names not out loud, never out loud, but with his eyes moving slowly down the column, the way a man reads a list of debts he is not sure he can ever repay. 25 names. 25 women. 25 different ways of discovering the same truth. He closed the journal, pressed his thumb against the cover for a long moment. Then he tucked it away and went downstairs to find out if anyone in Cedar Hollow needed a ranch hand. The man who had broken Nathaniel Carter was not a man at all. It was a moment. A single, quiet, devastating moment that happened on a Tuesday afternoon in the spring of 1879, when he came home early from a business meeting in Helena and found his wife Victoria standing in the front parlor of their home with her traveling trunk already packed. She was not crying. She was not angry. She was calm in the way that people are calm when they have already made a decision and feel nothing but relief. "I thought you would be gone until Thursday," she said. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of his own home and looked at the trunk, at the hat already on her head, at the way she was holding her gloves, not nervous, not guilty, simply ready. "Where are you going?" he asked. "Denver," she said, "with Charles Whitfield." I knew the name. Charles Whitfield was a railroad investor from the East. Rich in a way that was new and loud and certain, the kind of rich that arrived in rooms before the man did. "You're leaving me," Nathaniel said. It was not a question. "I waited," Victoria said, and there was something in her voice that was almost kind, which made it worse. "When the cattle prices dropped last year, I waited. When you said things would recover, I believed you. But Nathaniel—" She paused, looked at him with those clear eyes of hers. "I did not marry you to be uncertain." "The prices recovered," he said. "The ranch is fine. It was never—" "I know," she said. "I know it recovered. But I realized something during those months. I realized I was only happy when I was certain, and I cannot be certain with you." She picked up her gloves, pulled them on finger by finger. "I'm sorry," she said, and she walked past him, and she was gone. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of his own house for a very long time. I was not angry at Victoria. That was the worst part. He was angry at himself, at the years he had spent believing that love was a thing, a person gave freely without calculation, without the constant invisible measuring of what a man was worth in dollars and land and future guarantees. He had been a fool. He swore he would never be a fool again. The test began 6 months later, almost by accident. He was in a small town called Millbrook, traveling for business, when he met a woman named Eleanor at a church social. She was pretty and bright, and she laughed at his jokes, and when she asked what he did for work, something made him pause. He looked at his clothes. He had not dressed for business that day, just riding clothes, simple, nothing impressive. He said, "Ranch work mostly. Get by all right." And he watched her face. The smile stayed, but something shifted behind her eyes. A small recalibration. A quiet reassessment. And over the course of the evening, the warmth in her manner cooled by degrees so gradual, he might have missed it if he had not been watching. By the end of the social, she was talking to the banker's son from across the room. Nathaniel rode back to his hotel and sat alone and thought about what he had just seen. He thought about it for 3 days. Then he bought plain clothes, left his good boots at the ranch, and started what he later came to think of as his education. He went from town to town across Montana territory. He was always polite, always decent. He helped where he could. He believed the same man he had always been, just without the context of wealth that usually surrounded him. And he watched. He watched women who were warm when they thought he might be comfortable and cold when they thought he might not be. He watched mothers steer their daughters away when they learned he was just a ranch hand. He watched the calculation happen in real time. The way a person's eyes would lose their softness the moment they decided he was not worth the investment of kindness. 25 times. He kept the journal because he needed to believe he was conducting an experiment, not suffering. The journal made it scientific, bearable, safe. By the time he arrived in Cedar Hollow, Nathaniel Carter had convinced himself of 2 things. First, that he understood women completely. Second, that he would never be hurt again. He was wrong about both. He found work the second morning at a small operation run by a widower named Frank Aldridge, who needed fence repaired along his eastern pasture. The pay was modest, and the work was hard, and Nathaniel welcomed both. He worked with his hands the way he had when he was young, before the inheritance, before the empire, before the weight of 11,000 acres settled onto his shoulders. It was late afternoon, the fence half done, when he heard the sound. Not a dramatic sound. Not a sound that announced itself. Just a small, sharp intake of breath, the kind a person makes when they are trying very hard not to make any sound at all. He turned. There was a woman standing 20 feet away on the other side of the fence line, and she was reading a letter, and from the way she was holding herself perfectly still, perfectly controlled, every muscle locked against whatever the letter was telling her, he understood immediately that the news was not good. She was young. Not girlish young, but that particular young that belongs to a person who has already carried serious weight and worn it into something that looks like composure. She had dark hair pinned back practically, and she was wearing a teaching dress, the kind of plain, serious dress that said she worked for a living and made no apologies for it. She read to the end of the letter. Then she folded it carefully, put it in her pocket, took one long, slow breath, and went back to walking toward town as if nothing had happened. Nathaniel watched her go. Frank Aldridge came up beside him with a hammer and said, "That's Clara Bennett, schoolteacher. Come out west from Ohio after her daddy died." "What was in the letter?" Nathaniel asked before he could stop himself. Frank gave him a sideways look. "Bank letter. They're calling in a debt her father left. She's been paying it down on a teacher's wages." He paused. "That woman's been holding a family together with both hands since she was barely 20 years old." Nathaniel watched the distant figure until she disappeared around the corner of the hardware store. He picked up his hammer and went back to work. But he did not stop thinking about her. He saw her again that evening at Hester's boarding house. She was sitting at the common table with her younger brother, a thin boy of about 14 named Samuel, who had the look of someone who read more than he ate. Clara was helping him with what appeared to be mathematics, and she was doing it with the kind of patient, unhurried attention that some people give their work and most people cannot sustain. Samuel said something wrong and started to apologize, and Clara put her hand on his arm and said, "Don't apologize for being wrong. Being wrong is how you learn you needed to think harder. Start again." Samuel started again. Nathaniel sat at the far end of the table with his dinner and did not intrude. He was aware in a way that he found slightly annoying that he was paying attention to her more than the situation warranted. She had not looked at him. She did not appear to know he existed. She was entirely focused on the boy beside her, and on the pages in front of her, and on whatever private war she was fighting with the bank and the debt and the daily arithmetic of surviving on a teacher's wages in a frontier town. After dinner, Samuel said, "Clara, the Harmon boy said his daddy's thinking of pulling him from school. Says he needs him for the harvest." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'll speak with Mr. Harmon." "He won't listen." "He will if I explain things right." "Clara, you can't fix everything." She looked at her brother then with an expression that was equal parts exhaustion and absolute refusal to surrender. "I'm not trying to fix everything," she said quietly. "I'm just trying to fix this one thing, then the next one, then the one after that." Samuel looked at her for a moment. Then he went back to his mathematics. Nathaniel finished his dinner and went upstairs. He lay on his sagging mattress and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He thought about 25 women. He thought about Victoria and her traveling trunk and the calm in her voice. He thought about the journal in his coat pocket with its neat column of names, and then against his own will. He thought about Clara Bennett folding a bad letter with steady hands and walking back into town like it was just another piece of the road. He did not write her name in the journal. Not yet. He was not ready to begin watching her fail. 3 days later, he was at Aldridge's fence again, when he saw the Harmon boy walking past the school, not toward it. The boy stopped when he heard his name. Clara was standing in the doorway of the schoolhouse. She called again, and this time the boy turned around with the particular misery of someone who knows they are caught. Nathaniel was too far away to hear the full conversation, but he could read the shape of it. The boy saying something about his father. Clara listening without interrupting. Then Clara speaking quietly, firmly, without raising her voice once. Whatever she said, the boy came inside. Nathaniel watched the schoolhouse door close. Frank Aldridge said, "She got the Harmon boy back, did she?" "Looks like it." "She went to see Bill Harmon last week," Frank said. "Offered to give the boy extra lessons on Saturdays so he could help with harvest and still keep up with his schooling. Didn't ask for any extra pay. Just asked Bill to give the boy a chance." Nathaniel said nothing. Frank drove a fence post deeper into the ground with one hard strike. "Woman like that," Frank said, "doesn't ask the world for much. Just a fair shot and a little room to work." Nathaniel picked up his own hammer. "Most people don't get either one," he said. "No," Frank agreed. "They don't." The first time they actually spoke to each other. Not passing words. Not the polite nothing of the boarding house table, but actually spoke, was on a Wednesday evening when Clara was trying to move a heavy crate of donated books from the back of a wagon into the schoolhouse alone in the dark, because she had miscalculated how long the school day would run, and now it was nearly 9 o'clock, and Samuel was already in bed, and she was not the kind of woman who left a problem for tomorrow that she could solve tonight. Nathaniel was walking back from the livery when he saw her. He almost kept walking. He had a rule: do not intervene. Do not help in ways that create obligation or conversation. Stay peripheral. Stay invisible. Watch. He kept walking for 3 more steps. Then he turned around. "Let me take the other end," he said. Clara looked up. She studied him for a moment, not with suspicion exactly, but with the careful assessment of a woman who has learned to evaluate offers quickly. "I'm fine," she said. "I know you're fine," he said. "The crate's heavy. Let me take the other end." She looked at him for another second. Then she stepped back and let him take the other end. They carried it into the schoolhouse without speaking. He set his end down where she indicated. She straightened, pushed a loose strand of hair back, and looked at the crate now sitting exactly where it needed to be. "Thank you," she said. "No trouble," he said. He turned to leave. "You're the man staying at Hester's," she said. "The one doing fence work for Frank Aldridge." "That's right." "What's your name?" "Nathaniel." She nodded. "Clara Bennett." "I know," he said. Then, aware that sounded strange, he added, "Frank mentioned you." "Frank mentions everyone," she said, but there was a small curve at the corner of her mouth that was not quite a smile, but was related to one. Nathaniel looked at the crate. Where did the books come from? A church in Billings. They were clearing out their library. Most of these are old, but they're readable. She crouched down and opened the lid, and her voice changed slightly, warmed by a degree or two, when she said, "These children have 3 textbooks between 12 students. 3. The rest of the time we work from the board and from memory." "That's not enough," Nathaniel said. "No," she agreed simply and without drama. "It's not enough." She closed the lid again. "But it's more than they had yesterday." She stood. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said, and she walked back toward the door to close up the schoolhouse. Nathaniel walked back to Hester's in the dark. He did not sleep well that night. I was starting to understand that Clara Bennett was not going to behave the way 25 women had behaved before her, and the part of him that had spent 5 years building walls was beginning very quietly to panic. Over the following weeks, a pattern developed. Not a romantic pattern, nothing so clean or intentional as that. Just the gradual accumulation of small moments between 2 people who kept ending up in the same places at the same times, because Cedar Hollow was a small town, and they were both people who noticed things and helped where they could. He repaired a broken step at the schoolhouse one afternoon without being asked, because he had seen her testing it with her foot and noting the way it gave under pressure, and clearly filing it away for a future weekend when she could get to it. He did not tell her he had done it. She noticed the next morning and looked at the step for a long moment, then looked around the empty schoolyard, then went inside. She left a plate of food outside the door of his room at Hester's one evening after she overheard Hester telling another boarder that Nathaniel had worked straight through the noon meal again. The plate had a cloth over it and a note that said only a person can't work on empty. No signature. He ate the food and set the plate back outside her door washed. In the mornings, he sometimes saw her at the pump before anyone else was awake, drawing water for herself and Samuel, and occasionally she would look up when he came out, and they would nod to each other with the particular ease of 2 people who had no performance to maintain for each other at 5 in the morning. One of those mornings, she said, "You watch people." He stopped. "The way you look at things," she said, working the pump handle. "You're always paying attention. Most men look around and see the surface. You look like you're reading something." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. "You do the same thing," he said. She considered this. "I suppose I do." She filled her bucket. "Why do you—" He thought about the journal, about 25 names, about 5 years of watching with purpose. "I learned to," he said. She looked at him with those steady eyes. "Someone hurt you," she said. Not a question. Not cruel, just the plain recognition of a woman who was familiar with that particular kind of learning. Nathaniel said nothing. She picked up her bucket. "For what it's worth," she said, walking back toward the house. "Most people are better than they get credit for. They're just scared." She went inside. Nathaniel stood at the pump for a long moment. Then he went and got to work. The letter from the bank arrived again at the end of the month. Nathaniel knew because he saw Clara's face at breakfast. She had the same controlled stillness she'd had that first afternoon, every muscle holding steady against something that clearly wanted to knock her down. She ate breakfast without tasting it. She helped Samuel organize his school materials. She said her good mornings to Hester and to the other boarders, and then she went outside and stood at the corner of the building for exactly 2 minutes alone, and whatever she needed to feel, she felt it there, where no one could see. Then she walked to the schoolhouse. Nathaniel watched this from the window. He did not know why it hit him so hard. He had seen people in difficulty before. He had even in his quiet way helped people in difficulty, anonymously, carefully, without creating any connection that might expose his resources or compromise his experiment. But watching Clara Bennett give herself 2 minutes to fall apart, and then put herself back together and go to work something about that specific sequence, made the architecture of his experiment feel very fragile. That night, he wrapped 2 months of her bank debt in plain brown paper. He did not sign it. He slipped it beneath her door while she was at supper. He told himself it was not about her. He told himself he did this kind of thing sometimes. Anonymous help. Part of being a decent person, He almost believed it. The next morning, she was at his door before he was fully awake. She knocked 3 times, not loudly, but with a firmness that communicated she was not going to go away. He opened the door. She was holding the brown paper envelope still sealed. She held it out to him. "I can't take this," she said. He looked at the envelope. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," she said evenly. "I don't know how you knew, but you knew, and you did it because you're a decent person, and I am grateful for that. Genuinely. But I don't take money I haven't earned from people I don't have a relationship with." "Someone left that for you," he said. "I found it in the hall." She looked at him. He looked back. "Nathaniel," she said, and there was something in the way she said his name direct, without anger, but without any willingness to be misled. "Either, I've been managing on my own for 4 years. I know what charity looks like. I know what it costs people to accept it, and I've decided what I'm willing to pay. This," she held the envelope a little higher, "is not something I'm able to accept from someone I can't account for." He was quiet. "You're going to lose the month," he said. "The bank is my problem," she said, "that I'll solve on my own terms." She set the envelope on the fence post between them. She looked him straight in the eye. "I don't take charity from men I haven't earned the right to accept it from." Then she walked back to the schoolhouse. Nathaniel stood in the doorway of his room and looked at the envelope on the post. 25 women had come and gone. Not one of them had ever handed anything back. He picked up the envelope slowly. He held it. He thought about Victoria and the traveling trunk and the calm voice saying, "I did not marry you to be uncertain." He thought about the journal with 25 names. He thought about 5 years of building walls so carefully, so completely, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to be standing on the inside of them. Clara Bennett had just told him with perfect clarity and zero cruelty that she was not interested in what he could provide. She was interested in who he was. And Nathaniel Carter, who had spent 5 years trying to find out if that person was even possible. That person, that woman, that reaction stood in his doorway with a sealed envelope in his hands, and felt the walls he had built begin almost imperceptibly to shift. He had come to Cedar Hollow looking for his 26th test. I was beginning to understand that Clara Bennett was not taking the test. She was giving him one, and he had no idea yet whether he was going to pass it. He put the envelope in his saddlebag, not because he was giving up on helping her. He was not built that way, and 5 years of pretending to be someone else had not changed the core of him. But he understood with a clarity that surprised him that Clara Bennett had just drawn a line, and that the line was not about pride or stubbornness. It was about something older and more serious than either of those things. It was about dignity. And Nathaniel Carter, who had spent 5 years watching women calculate the cost of his company, found that he had absolutely no idea what to do with a woman who refused to be in anyone's debt. I went to work at Aldridge's fence. He drove posts. He stretched wire. He worked through the noon meal the way he always did, and Frank Aldridge brought him a cup of coffee around 2 o'clock and sat on the tailgate of the wagon and said nothing for a few minutes, which was Frank's way of opening a conversation. Nathaniel drank the coffee. "She gave it back," Frank said eventually. Nathaniel did not ask how Frank knew. Cedar Hollow was a small town. Cedar Hollow was the kind of small town where the news of a woman returning an envelope to a man's doorstep at 7 in the morning could cover the entire population before the schoolhouse bell rang. "She gave it back," Nathaniel confirmed. Frank was quiet again. Then, "You surprised?" Nathaniel thought about it honestly. "I shouldn't be," he said. "I watched her for weeks before I did it. I knew exactly who she was. And yet," Frank said. "And yet," Nathaniel agreed. Frank finished his coffee. Set the cup down on the tailgate. "There's a difference," he said, "between knowing what a person is made of and being ready for what that means when it comes at you." He picked up his hammer. "Most men who test women don't expect to be tested back." He went back to work. Nathaniel stood there for a moment longer. Then he went back to work too. That evening, Samuel Bennett came to find him. Nathaniel was at the livery checking on his horse when the boy appeared in the doorway slightly out of breath, with the look of someone who had rehearsed a speech on the way over and was now unsure whether to deliver it. "My sister doesn't know I'm here," Samuel said. "All right," Nathaniel said and kept working. "She'd probably be angry if she found out." Probably. Samuel came a few steps closer. He was a serious boy, lean and watchful, with Clara's same quality of paying attention to things most people looked past. "She's not ungrateful," he said. "I want you to know that. She talked about it for an hour last night after supper, about whether she'd done the right thing." Nathaniel stopped, looked at the boy. "What did she decide?" "That she had," Samuel said. "But it bothered her more than she let on, because she knew you meant it kindly, and she doesn't." He paused, choosing words the way a careful person chooses footing on uncertain ground. "She doesn't find it easy to turn away kindness. She's had to learn how." Nathaniel said nothing. Samuel looked at his boots. "Our father wasn't a bad man. He just borrowed against things he didn't fully own, and when he died, the debt was still there. Clara was 20. I was 10. She worked 2 jobs for a year before she qualified as a teacher. She never asked anybody for anything." He looked up. "Not because she's proud, because every time she accepted something from someone, there was always later a cost she hadn't agreed to." Nathaniel felt something move in his chest that he did not immediately have a name for. "I'm not collecting a debt," he said. "I know that," Samuel said. "I think she knows that too. That's why it bothered her." He straightened. "I just wanted you to know she's not—" He searched for the word unaware, of people, of what they mean. He turned to leave. "Samuel," Nathaniel said. The boy stopped. "The mathematics she was helping you with the other night. The problem you kept getting wrong." Samuel's expression shifted slightly, wary. "What about it?" "You were solving it correctly," Nathaniel said. "The method was right. You were rounding the final figure too early. Move the rounding to the last step and you'll get it every time." Samuel stared at him. "How do you know that?" he said. "I did a lot of accounting before I came out here," Nathaniel said. It was true. It was also, like most things he said in Cedar Hollow, true, in a way that was missing the larger context. Samuel looked at him for a long, measuring moment. Then he said, "Thank you," and walked back out into the evening. Nathaniel watched him go. He stood in the livery for a long time after that, his hand resting on his horse's neck, thinking about a 20-year-old girl holding a family together with both hands while a debt she had not made tried to pull her under. He thought about his own 25 names. He thought about the women who had left when things looked uncertain. I thought about what it meant that the one person in Cedar Hollow who had the most real and immediate reason to want financial security was also the only person who had ever handed his money back. He thought about Frank Aldridge's words. "Most men who test women don't expect to be tested back." He went upstairs and took the journal out of his coat pocket. He opened it to the last page. He looked at the 25 names for a long time. Then he closed it, and for the first time in 5 years, he put it in the bottom of his saddlebag instead of his inner pocket. It was a small thing. It felt enormous. October came to Cedar Hollow with the particular force it reserves for frontier towns, cold mornings that arrived earlier each day, a sharpness in the wind that reminded everyone of what was coming and how little time remained to prepare for it. Clara had begun staying late at the schoolhouse 3 nights a week, running extra sessions for students whose families were pulling them in for harvest work. Nathaniel knew this because the light in the schoolhouse window stayed on past 9, and because he had stopped pretending even to himself that he was not paying attention. One Tuesday night, he walked past the schoolhouse at 9:30, and the light was still on, and he could hear her voice through the thin wall. Patient and clear, working through a reading lesson with what sounded like 2 or 3 students. He went back to Hester's. He came back at 10:30 with a lantern because the walk back to the boarding house was dark, and the road had ruts that would turn an ankle if a person was not careful, and he sat on the fence outside the schoolhouse and waited. At 11:15, the door opened, and 2 children came out, the Harmon boy and a girl Nathaniel didn't know, and behind them came Clara, pulling on her coat, looking like someone who had poured the last of themselves into the evening and was running now on pure habit. She saw him. She stopped. "You don't need to do that," she said. "I know," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, "Come on then." And they walked back to the boarding house together in the dark, the lantern between them throwing a circle of light just wide enough for two people to walk in. "How's the Harmon boy doing?" Nathaniel asked. "Better than he thinks he is," Clara said. "He's smart. He just doesn't know it yet because nobody's told him often enough." Her voice carried something that was half frustration, half protectiveness. Children believe what the adults around them repeat. If you tell a child he's not built for learning, he'll spend 20 years proving you right. You tell them otherwise. Every chance I get. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "What I give them isn't complicated. It's just attention. Someone paying real attention to what they're capable of." She paused. "That turns out to be rarer than it should be." Nathaniel said nothing, but he felt the words land somewhere specific. They reached Hester's front gate. Clara stopped, looked at the lantern, then at him. "Your hands," she said abruptly. He looked down. "What about them? First time I saw you, I thought that man works with his hands. But it's not just the calluses, it's the way you hold things." She tilted her head slightly, studying him with that frank, unhurried gaze she used on problems she was working through. "You hold things like someone who learned to be careful with them. Which means at some point, you dropped something important." The silence between them stretched. "I was married," he said. It came out more easily than he expected. It didn't end well. "I'm sorry," she said without flinching, without over-softening it. Just the plain human acknowledgement of a fact. "She left," he said, "when things looked uncertain." Clara was quiet for a moment. "That's a specific kind of hurt," she said. "Learning that someone only loved the version of you that was certain." He looked at her. "How do you know what kind of hurt it is?" he asked. "Because I've been on the other side of it," she said. "My father needed to believe everything was going to be fine, so everyone around him became a mirror for that belief. When I started telling him the truth about the debt about the farm, he stopped being able to look at me." She said it without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. "Some people don't love you less when things get difficult. They just love a different person than you actually are." Nathaniel held the lantern and looked at this woman standing in front of him in the dark, and felt something that he had no clean category for. Something that was not quite admiration and not quite recognition, but was made out of both of those things. "Good night, Nathaniel," she said. "Good night, Clara." She went inside. He stood at the gate for a moment, the lantern still burning in his hand. He thought, "I am in serious trouble." The first twist came on a Friday, and it came from a direction he had not anticipated. A man named Garrett Cole arrived in Cedar Hollow. He was from the county land office, well-dressed, professionally pleasant, with a sheaf of papers and a manner that suggested the papers were very important and very favorable to whoever was listening. Nathaniel saw him ride in and felt something tighten in his gut immediately. He had seen men like Garrett Cole before. He had dealt with men like Garrett Cole before on behalf of his own land holdings, and he recognized the particular texture of a man who arrived in a small town with paperwork. Cole made his way around Cedar Hollow over the course of Friday and Saturday, talking to business owners, talking to Frank Aldridge, talking to a half-dozen other men who owned land in the county. He was cheerful and informative, and he used words like opportunity and consolidation and future prosperity in ways that sounded generous and felt, if you were listening carefully, slightly greedy. Nathaniel listened carefully. On Saturday afternoon, Cole appeared at the schoolhouse. Nathaniel was across the street repairing a storefront shutter for old Mrs. Hennessy, and he watched Cole go into the school, and he watched Clara's face in the window as she listened to whatever Cole was saying, and he watched the moment her expression shifted from professional attention to something sharper. Cole left 20 minutes later, still smiling. Clara stood at her schoolhouse door and watched him walk away. Then she looked across the street and found Nathaniel looking at her. She held up one finger, wait, and went inside. She came out 2 minutes later with her coat and crossed the street to where he was standing. "What do you know about land consolidation?" she asked. He kept his face neutral. "Some," he said. "That man just told me that the county is offering property owners in Cedar Hollow and the surrounding area a chance to transfer deed rights into a new consolidated holding under a county-administered trust. He said it protects small landowners from tax fluctuation. She paused. He was very convincing. He is also, I think, not telling the truth. Nathaniel looked at her. What makes you say that? He brought 3 copies of a standard agreement, but let me read only the summary page. When I asked to see the underlying terms, he said the full document was still being reviewed by the county attorney. She looked in the direction Cole had gone. A man who's offering you something genuinely good doesn't need to control what you read. Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. He was recalibrating rapidly and silently. The land scheme she was describing had a shape he recognized, had seen before in fact, in territories where land was cheap and documentation was loose, and a fast-talking man with county letterhead could accumulate deed transfers before anyone understood what they had signed away. Did he ask you to sign anything? Nathaniel asked. He asked me to pass word to the families of my students. Many of them own small parcels. He said they were exactly the kind of people this program was designed to help. Her jaw tightened. He wants me to recruit them. Are you going to? She looked at him as if the question were mildly insulting. Of course not, she said. But I need to understand what he's actually doing before I can tell people why they shouldn't listen to him. If I warn them without evidence, he'll say I'm the one spreading misinformation. She was right. Nathaniel knew she was right. He also knew that what she was describing, a county-backed land grab using a schoolteacher's community trust as a distribution network, was exactly the kind of scheme that required someone with enough legal and financial knowledge to take it apart piece by piece. He looked at her. She looked at him. You said you did accounting, she said. I did. Can you read a land agreement? Yes. Will you help me figure out what that man is actually offering? Nathaniel thought about the journal in the bottom of his saddlebag. He thought about 25 names. He thought about the experiment he had been conducting. The walls he had built, the careful distance he had maintained. They worked in the schoolhouse that night. Clara had already written down everything Cole had said, in order with the parts that didn't fit, marked with small asterisks in the margin. Nathaniel looked at her notes and felt, despite himself, the particular respect that comes from watching someone operate with real precision. This phrase, he said, pointing. Deed rights transferred to administrative trust. That's not a protection. That's a transfer of ownership. Clara looked at the phrase. He said the trust protects the original owner's rights. In that kind of arrangement, the trust owns the land. The original holder becomes a beneficiary of the trust, which sounds like the same thing, but isn't. The trust can be dissolved, transferred, sold. The beneficiary has very little legal recourse. He paused. Did he leave you any written materials? The summary page. He read it. 3 minutes. Then he set it down. This is structured to look like an assistance program, he said. It's structured to acquire deed transfers from small landowners who don't have the legal resources to understand what they're signing. Once the trust holds enough land, someone can move on the total holding in one transaction. Clara was very still. How many families did he speak to? She asked. I saw him at Aldridge's, the hardware store, the feed store. He was at the Miller place this morning. She stood up. Started pacing, not anxiously, but with the focused energy of someone working through a problem at speed. If he's targeting families through the school, he's going after the smallest landholders, people who own 40-80 acres, people who can't afford an attorney and don't have time to investigate a document. She stopped. He'll be back Monday. He said he was giving people the weekend to consider. We have 2 days, Nathaniel said. 2 days to what I can't accuse him of fraud without documentation. No, Nathaniel agreed. But you can give people a reason to ask questions he can't answer cleanly. If they go in asking specific questions about the trust structure, about who holds the deed during the trust period, about the dissolution clause, he either answers them and exposes the structure, or he doesn't answer them, which exposes him differently. Clara looked at him. You know a great deal, she said, for a man doing fence work. The statement landed with more weight than she probably intended. Nathaniel held her gaze. I grew up around land dealings, he said. Learned early what the wrong kind looked like. She accepted this. Not because she was naive. He understood now that she was the furthest thing from naive, but because she was focused on the problem, and the problem was more urgent than whatever question she might have about a man who did fence work and read land agreements, like someone who had seen 100 of them. "Write down the questions," she said. "I'll talk to Frank Aldridge in the morning, and the Millers, and the Harmons." She looked at him steadily. "Will you come with me?" "Yes," he said. She nodded, picked up her pen. They worked until after midnight. And somewhere in those hours, in the space between her careful notes and his precise legal parsing in the way she pushed back when she thought he was wrong and accepted it immediately when he could show her why she wasn't in the moment, when she said "that's exactly right," with the tone of someone who was genuinely pleased to understand something and not merely pleased to be agreeable somewhere. In all of that, the last small part of the wall around Nathaniel Carter's chest that he had been absolutely sure was permanent began to come loose. He did not acknowledge it, but he felt it. Sunday morning they started with Frank Aldridge. Frank listened to Clara lay out the questions, clear sequential building one on top of the other, the way she built a lesson, and when she finished, he sat back in his chair and said, "I shook that man's hand on Friday. I was about to sign Monday." "Don't," Clara said. "I won't," Frank said. He looked at Nathaniel. "This you're doing too." "Clara identified it," Nathaniel said. "I just helped explain the mechanism." Frank studied him with the particular attention of an older man who has spent a life reading people in the way you read weather, not dramatically, but accurately. "You know," Frank said, "for a man who showed up here with a saddlebag and a worn shirt, you seem to know an awful lot about an awful lot." Nathaniel said nothing. Frank let it go, for now. By afternoon, they had spoken to 4 families. 3 of them had already agreed to sign. 1 had already signed the preliminary document Cole had left behind, and that family, the Delacroix family, 8 acres on the north edge of town. 3 children under 12 went pale when Clara explained what they might have agreed to. "What do we do?" Mrs. Delacroix asked. "The preliminary document isn't binding without the final signature," Nathaniel said. "If you revoke your intention in writing before he returns Monday, you're protected." He looked at Clara. Clara was already writing. She drafted the revocation letter at the Delacroix kitchen table in 10 minutes in plain language that left no room for misinterpretation. She read it aloud once, asked if there were any words they didn't understand. Changed one phrase when Mrs. Delacroix said it was confusing. Then she signed it as a witness, and Mr. Delacroix signed it as the landowner, and they had a second copy made, and Clara told them to hand one to Cole on Monday and keep the other somewhere safe. Mrs. Delacroix gripped Clara's hand when they stood to leave. "You didn't have to do this," she said. "Yes, I did," Clara said simply, without any performance of modesty. "You're my student's family. Of course I did." They walked back toward town in the late afternoon, and Nathaniel was quiet for a long time, and Clara did not push him into conversation, and after a while she said, "You're thinking about something. I'm thinking that what you just did for that family is the kind of thing most people would have found a reason not to do," he said. "Too complicated, not your business, too much trouble on a Sunday." Clara considered this. "It would be exactly my business, even if I hadn't been the one Cole tried to recruit. They can't afford to lose 8 acres. She said it matter-of-factly. "And I can afford to spend a Sunday. So." Nathaniel stopped walking. She walked 2 more steps before she realized and turned around. He was looking at her with an expression that must have been strange on his face, because she tilted her head slightly and said, "What?" He did not know how to say what he was thinking. He was thinking that he had spent 5 years trying to find proof that a person could care about something other than what they stood to gain. He was thinking that the proof had been standing in the Delacroix kitchen, drafting a revocation letter on a Sunday afternoon without anyone asking her to. He was thinking that whatever experiment he had come to Cedar Hollow to conduct was no longer something he was conducting. It was something that was happening to him. "Nothing," he said. "Come on." She gave him one more of those long reading looks. Then she turned back toward town. Nathaniel fell into step beside her, and the wind came down cold from the north, and Clara pulled her coat a little tighter, and he thought about a journal in the bottom of a saddlebag with 25 names in it, and the way she had handed the envelope back without cruelty and without drama, and he understood with a certainty that sat in him like ballast that whatever came next was going to require more honesty than he had given anyone in 5 years. He was not ready for it, but he was for the first time in a very long time willing to get there. Garrett Cole came back on Monday morning with his pleasant smile and his sheaf of papers. He did not get a single signature. What he got was 6 different landowners asking 6 very specific questions about trust dissolution clauses, deed, transfer timelines, and beneficiary rights. And when he could not answer those questions cleanly, the pleasant smile started to crack at the edges, and by noon he was back on his horse, and by mid-afternoon he was gone from Cedar Hollow entirely. Frank Aldridge stood on the porch of the general store and watched him ride out. He said to no one in particular, "That's a man who's going to find easier ground somewhere else." Nathaniel stood beside him. "Then someone needs to make sure the county land office hears about what he was doing here," Nathaniel said. Frank looked at him sideways. "You know people at the county land office?" "I know people," Nathaniel said carefully. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, "Nathaniel, I'm going to ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business, which is your right. But I've known you 2 months now, and I've watched you work, and I've watched you help, and I've watched you be careful about how much people find out about you." Nathaniel said nothing. "Are you who you say you are?" Frank asked. The question sat between them in the cold October air. Nathaniel looked down the road where Cole's dust was settling. "I'm exactly who I say I am," he said. "The things I haven't told you, they're not lies. They're just—" he paused. "Context I haven't been ready to give." Frank looked at him for a long time. "All right," he said finally. "But I'll tell you this. Whatever context you've been keeping back Clara Bennett is not someone you should let find out from someone else." He picked up his hat. "Women who handle themselves the way she does don't mind the truth. They mind the delay." He went inside. Nathaniel stood on the porch alone. He reached into his coat pocket automatically, the gesture of 5 years reaching for the journal. His pocket was empty. The journal was in the saddlebag. He put his hand back at his side. The afternoon was cold, and the town was quiet, and somewhere down the road, a good woman was teaching children who needed her. And Nathaniel Carter stood on a porch in Cedar Hollow, Montana, and understood that Frank Aldridge was right, and that he was running out of time, and that the weight of what he had not said was becoming heavier day by day than anything he had ever carried on the ranch. He went to find her. He was going to tell her. He made it as far as the schoolhouse door, and then a wagon pulled up beside him, and a voice said, "Nathaniel Carter, I thought that was you." And everything that was about to happen stopped. The man on the wagon was Lawrence Briggs, an investor from Helena, who had done business with Nathaniel's ranch operation for the better part of a decade, and he was staring at Nathaniel with the uncomplicated confusion of a man who has just seen something that makes no sense to him. "What in the world are you doing in Cedar Hollow?" Briggs said. "And why are you dressed like that?" Heard the schoolhouse door open behind him. He did not need to turn around to know that Clara was standing in it. Nathaniel did not turn around. He kept his eyes on Lawrence Briggs, and he watched the man's face cycle through confusion and recognition and the particular delight that people feel when they have stumbled into something interesting, and he thought, "I have about 4 seconds before this becomes something I cannot control." He got 2. "Nathaniel Carter," Briggs said again, louder this time with the easy confidence of a man who has no idea he is standing in the middle of someone else's life. "Owner of the Carter Ranch operation. 11,000 acres up in the Helena Valley. I did your eastern grazing contract 3 years running." He laughed short and baffled. "What in God's name are you doing dressed like a ranch hand in Cedar Hollow?" Nathaniel heard the schoolhouse door open wider behind him. He heard Clara's footstep on the wooden step. He turned around. She was standing in the doorway with a stack of papers against her chest. Lesson papers. He could see the ones she graded in the evenings, and she was looking at him with an expression that was not yet anything definable. It was the expression of a person who has just heard 2 contradictory things and is waiting for the one that makes sense to rise to the top. It did not rise to the top. 11,000 acres, she said quietly. It was not a question. "Clara. Helena Valley," she said. "Let me explain." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at Briggs, who was now reading the situation with the slow horror of a man who has accidentally walked into a room where something irreversible is occurring. "Ma'am, I apologize," Briggs said. "I didn't mean to." "It's all right," Clara said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. "Thank you for the information." She went back inside. The door closed behind her with a sound that was not quite a slam and not quite quiet. Briggs looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at the closed door. "I'll see you later, Lawrence," he said. "Nathaniel, I'm sorry I didn't know." "It's all right," Nathaniel said, and he walked to the schoolhouse door and knocked and waited. And when there was no answer, he said, "Clara, please." Silence. He put his hand on the doorframe. "I know what this looks like," he said low and even to the wood of the door. "I know I don't have a right to ask you to hear me out before you decide what it means. But I'm asking anyway, not because it will make it better, because you deserve to understand what actually happened instead of just the shape of it." A long silence. Then her voice came through the door, still controlled, but with something underneath it that was not controlled at all. "The children are still here, Nathaniel." He stepped back. "I'll wait," he said. He sat down on the step, and he waited. It was 40 minutes before the last student left. He counted them out 3, then 2 together, then the Harmon boy alone, who glanced at Nathaniel sitting on the step with his elbows on his knees, and said nothing, and kept walking. Nathaniel sat through all of it without moving, because the act of waiting there was the only honest thing he had done in Cedar Hollow since the day he arrived, and he was not going to take it back. When the last footstep faded, the door opened. Clara did not invite him in. She came outside and stood on the step above him, so she was looking down, and crossed her arms against the cold and said, "How much is real?" "All of it," he said immediately. "Everything that happened between us, every conversation, every evening last Sunday, none of that was manufactured. But who you are was." "Who I appeared to be," he said. "Not who I am." She made a sound that was not agreement. "Tell me the rest," she said. So he told her. He told her about Victoria, about the trunk, the traveling dress, the gloves pulled on finger by finger. He told her about the 6 months of sitting on a ranch that suddenly felt like it belonged to a stranger. He told her about Eleanor at the Millbrook Church social, and the way warmth had cooled by degrees over the course of an evening, and the 3 days he spent afterward deciding what it meant. He told her about the journal. He said that part plainly, without softening it, that he had kept a list, that there had been 25 women over 5 years, that he had come to each new town with the intention of finding out what a person was like when they believed he had nothing, because he had stopped being able to trust any warmth that arrived in the context of his actual life. He told her that he had arrived in Cedar Hollow expecting one more data point. He told her that she had not behaved like a data point. Clara listened to all of it without interrupting. Her face was turned slightly away from him, not in dismissal, but in the manner of someone who needs to hear clearly and cannot afford to be distracted by expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The envelope," she said finally. "Yes. That was real. You weren't testing me with that." "No," he said. "By then I wasn't testing anything. By then I was just—" He stopped, searched for the honest word. "Worried about you." She turned and looked at him fully. "That's worse," she said. He blinked. "Why?" "Because it means I was right to trust my instincts about you." She pressed her lips together briefly. "And being right about someone who was deceiving me is it doesn't feel the way I'd prefer it to feel." "Clara, I'm not finished," she said, and her voice cracked for just a moment, one small fracture in the composure before she locked it back down. "You want to know what hurts? It's not the money. I genuinely don't care about the money. It never occurred to me to care about it because I was too busy caring about—" She stopped, pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth. Then, "You watched me. For weeks before we ever spoke. You watched me, and you made decisions about me, and you let me think we were building something on level ground." "We were," he said. "That's what I'm trying to—" "The ground was not level, Nathaniel." Her voice came back sharp and precise. You knew things about me that I didn't know about you. You knew what I was struggling with. You knew what I needed. And you made choices based on that knowledge while keeping your own circumstances completely hidden. That is not level ground. That is you standing on a hill watching. The words hit him, the way only true things hit, not with the bluntness of attack, but with the particular internal impact of something that finds the exact shape of a wound that was already there. He said nothing, because she was right. He had been standing on a hill watching for 5 years, and he had told himself that it was wisdom, and that it was self-protection, and that it was the rational response to what Victoria had done. But standing here listening to Clara say it out loud, in her clear and unflinching way, he understood for the first time what it had actually been. It had been fear dressed up as methodology. "I'm sorry," he said. She looked at him for a long measuring moment. "I know you are," she said. "That's not forgiveness," he said. "No," she agreed. "It's not." She went back inside. This time, the door closed quietly. I went back to Hester's. He sat on his sagging mattress and took the journal out of the saddlebag and held it in both hands and looked at it for a long time. Not reading it, just holding it. Feeling the weight of 5 years of self-protection and how small it was in his hands when he wasn't using it as a shield. He thought about Clara's voice when it cracked. That one small fracture before she locked it back. He thought about the fact that she had said I was too busy caring about and stopped. And what came after the about was something she had not said out loud, and the missing words sat in him like a coal burning slow. He opened the journal to the page with 25 names. He read every one. Then he closed the journal, stood up, walked to the cold stove in the corner of the room, opened the iron door, set the journal inside and lit it. He stood and watched it burn. I was not doing it as a gesture. He was not doing it for anyone to see. He was doing it because keeping the journal had meant keeping the architecture of his fear in written form, and he understood now that as long as it existed, some part of him would use it to justify staying behind the walls it had built. The journal burned in about 4 minutes. Nathaniel closed the stove door. He went to bed. He did not sleep. By morning the news was through Cedar Hollow. He did not know who had told it, or how it had traveled, or whether Briggs had spoken at the saloon the night before. He only knew that when he came downstairs at 7 o'clock, Hester Boone looked at him from behind the stove with an expression he had not seen from her before. Not cold, not unkind, but recalibrated in a way that communicated she was looking at someone slightly different than who she had thought she was feeding for the past 2 months. "Morning," she said. "Morning, Hester." She set a plate in front of him. Then she said without looking up from the stove, "People in this town trusted you." "I know." "Frank Aldridge says you're a decent man," she said. "Frank doesn't say that about many people, and he's rarely wrong." She turned and looked at him directly. "But decent men don't hide their whole lives and watch people make decisions in the dark." "No," Nathaniel said. "They don't." She held his gaze for a moment. "Clara's not at breakfast," Hester said. "I noticed." "She left early, took Samuel with her. She'll be at the school by now." Hester turned back to the stove. "She's the kind of woman who works when she's hurt. It keeps her from having to sit still with it." Nathaniel looked at the plate in front of him. "Thank you, Hester," he said. "Don't thank me," she said. "Eat. Then go figure out what kind of man you actually are." He did not go to the schoolhouse. Not that morning and not that afternoon. He understood that going immediately would look like exactly what it was. Panic dressed up as urgency. And that Clara Bennett, who had spent 4 years building the discipline to feel things on her own timeline, and no one else's, would see it for what it was and would not respect it. What he did instead was go to Frank Aldridge. Frank was in his barn when Nathaniel arrived, and he looked up from what he was doing and waited with the patience of a man who has enough experience to know that whatever is coming, it will arrive at its own pace. "I owe you an honest account," Nathaniel said. Frank set down his tools. "I'm listening." So, Nathaniel told Frank. All of it this time, not the version he had been giving piece by piece over 2 months, but the whole actual architecture. The ranch, the acreage, the Helena bank accounts, Victoria. The journal. The 25 towns. The experiment that had turned into something else the moment Clara Bennett handed an envelope back through a doorway and said she didn't take charity from men she hadn't earned the right to accept it from. Frank listened without expression until Nathaniel was done. Then he said, 11,000 acres. Give or take. And you've been doing my fence work. I needed to do something with my hands, Nathaniel said. Frank was quiet for a moment. The coal thing, he said. The land scheme. You knew what that was because you've been on the other end of deals like that. Yes. And the questions you had us ask him. You knew those because you've been in rooms where people tried to run the same scheme the other direction. Yes. Frank picked up his tools again. Started working. Not dismissively, just in the way of a man who thinks better when his hands are moving. Here's the thing about what you did, Frank said. The hiding, the watching. You're going to spend a lot of time feeling bad about it. Some of that feeling bad is appropriate. He drove a nail cleanly. But some of it isn't. Because the watching, that's how you knew the coal scheme needed stopping. That's how you knew those families needed help. The same instinct that made you cautious made you useful. He looked up. The mistake wasn't that you were careful. The mistake was that you kept being careful after you found someone who deserved better. Nathaniel said nothing. Clara's not going to stay angry, Frank said. She doesn't have the disposition for it. But she is going to need to know that you understand what you actually did wrong. Not the surface of it, the heart of it. He held Nathaniel's gaze. Can you name it? Nathaniel thought about Clara standing above him on the step. The ground was not level. You were standing on a hill watching. He thought about 5 years of watching from a safe distance and calling it wisdom. I let fear make my decisions, he said. And I called it strategy. Frank nodded. Once. Slowly. That'll do, he said. Now, what are you going to do about the coal situation? You said someone needs to contact the county land office. I'm going to write to the territorial land commissioner, Nathaniel said. I know him, and I'm going to go through the records Cole left behind. There was a copy of the preliminary agreement the Delacroix family signed and revoked. I want to know if he's run this same scheme in other counties. And if he has, then we document it and we send it to someone with the authority to stop him before he finds easier ground. Frank looked at him. That kind of documentation takes time and resources. I have both, Nathaniel said. Frank picked up his hammer again. Well then, he said. I suppose you'd better get started. He worked through the afternoon, and by evening he had a letter drafted to the Territorial Land Commissioner, and a second letter to a Helena attorney he trusted, and a third letter requesting copies of land transaction records from 3 surrounding counties. He was writing the third letter when Samuel appeared at the door of Hester's common room. The boy looked at him for a moment. Then he came in and sat down across the table. Nathaniel set down his pen. She knows I'm here, Samuel said. I'm not sneaking this time. All right. Samuel looked at the letters on the table, then back at Nathaniel. She cried, he said. Last night. After I was supposed to be asleep. She doesn't do that. His voice was even, but his jaw was set with the effort of someone reporting something that cost him. I've seen her get bad news about the debt and hold it together. I've seen her deal with things that would knock most people sideways. She doesn't cry where people can see it. I know, Nathaniel said. Do you understand what that means? Samuel asked. That she cried. It means she cared, Nathaniel said quietly, before she had a reason not to. Samuel looked at him steadily. He had Clara's eyes, that same quality of looking at something straight on without flinching from what they found. Are you going to fix it? Samuel asked. I'm going to try, Nathaniel said. But not by rushing. She needs time to think, and she's earned the right to take it. She thinks you're a good man, Samuel said. She said that last night too. She said the worst part was that she still thought you were a good man, even after she was angry at you, and she wasn't sure what to do with that. Nathaniel felt the weight of that land in him and stay. Samuel, he said. The math you've been working on, the accounting problems. The boy blinked at the change. What about them? There's a ledger at my ranch operation that's been giving my manager fits for 3 months. The error is in the seasonal yield projections, something small, compounding across 6 quarters until it looks like a large discrepancy. He paused. Would you be willing to look at it? I'll send for the pages. It might take a week or two. Samuel stared at him. You're asking me to do your ranch accounting. I'm asking you to look at a problem my manager can't solve, Nathaniel said. You're better at sequential arithmetic than anyone I've met, including several men I've paid significant wages. Samuel was quiet for a moment. Why? He said. Because you're going to need something to put in a letter to a university admissions committee in a few years, Nathaniel said, and solved a 6-quarter yield discrepancy for a Montana ranch operation will look considerably better than completed schoolhouse arithmetic. Samuel stared at him for a long time. This is not about the math, Samuel said finally. No. Nathaniel agreed. It's not entirely about the math. You're trying to help us. I'm trying to help you, Nathaniel said. Your sister I'm trying to earn. Samuel looked at the letters on the table. At Nathaniel. At the letters again. She'd be angry if she knew you offered me this, he said. Yes, Nathaniel agreed. She'd say you're using me to get to her. She'd be partly right, Nathaniel said. The other part is that the problem in the ledger is real, and your instinct for numbers is genuine, and both of those things can be true at the same time. Samuel considered this with the mathematical precision he applied to everything. Send for the pages, he said and stood up. I'll look at them. He left. Nathaniel finished his letters. He sealed them, addressed them, and stacked them for the morning post. Then he sat alone in the quiet of Hester's common room and thought about what came next. What came next arrived 4 days later, and it arrived in the form of a woman named Margaret Story. She came in on the Thursday stage, from Helena well-dressed, self-possessed, the kind of beautiful that had clearly been carefully maintained. She walked into Hester's boarding house with a small trunk and a name Nathaniel recognized before she ever introduced herself, because he had heard it before in Helena at business dinners, in the kind of conversations that happened in rooms where money was the primary language. Margaret Story was Garrett Cole's employer, not in any official capacity, not in any way that a document could prove. But Nathaniel knew it the way you know things when you have spent years in rooms where decisions are made, and the person making them is rarely the person standing in front of you. Cole had been the face. Margaret Story was the operation. She did not recognize Nathaniel. I was not surprised. He had been careful, and she had never met him in person, and he was sitting in the corner of Hester's common room in his worn shirt and his cracked boots, looking exactly like what he had been pretending to be for 2 months. He listened. She told Hester she was in Cedar Hollow on land business. She was looking for small parcel holders who might be interested in a county consolidation program. Nathaniel set down his coffee cup very carefully. Cole had failed. He had run and he had left, and Margaret Story, rather than abandon the scheme, had come herself, which meant the parcels in Cedar Hollow were more valuable than he had understood. He needed to know why. He needed to know what was under the land in this county that made it worth Margaret Story's personal travel, because it was never the land itself. Land in frontier territory was available. What made specific parcels worth orchestrating a fraud scheme was what was under it or what was going through it. A waterway, a mineral deposit, a proposed rail line. I thought about the Delacroix farm, 8 acres on the north edge of town. He thought about Frank Aldridge's eastern pasture. He thought about the specific geography of Cedar Hollow and what ran through it. A river, the Blackstone tributary, running straight through the northern parcels. Water rights. Someone was acquiring water rights in Cedar Hollow, and they were doing it by making small landowners think they were signing an assistance program instead of a deed transfer. Nathaniel stood up from his corner table. He had 3 letters on their way to Helena. He needed to send a 4th. He was almost out the door when Margaret Story said behind him, "Excuse me, are you a property holder in this area?" He turned around. She was looking at him with the professional warmth of a woman who had made her living reading people and adjusting her presentation accordingly. She saw a ranch hand. She saw someone who might have land. And, "Just working here," Nathaniel said. She smiled politely. "Passing through, for now," he said. She nodded and turned away. Nathaniel walked outside. He walked quickly to the post office and wrote the fourth letter on the post office counter in 5 minutes. Sealed it, paid the postmaster extra for urgent routing, and watched it go. Then he stood on the Cedar Hollow Main Street in the November cold and understood that the situation had just become significantly more complicated, and that Clara Bennett and her students' families were sitting on land that a very organized, very determined woman wanted, and that the experiment Nathaniel had come to conduct was now the furthest thing from relevant. He needed to stop this, and to stop it properly, he was going to have to stop pretending he was a ranch hand. He was going to have to be exactly who he was. He turned and walked toward the schoolhouse. This time he did not stop at the door. He knocked, waited, heard her footsteps. She opened it. She looked at him with that steady, guarded look, still processing, still holding herself at a careful distance from whatever she felt. And before she could say anything, he said, "There's something you need to know. Not about me. About Cedar Hollow. About the land." He held her gaze. "And this time, I'm not keeping anything back." She looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness. Not yet. Not even close. But the recognition of a person who understands that the moment at hand requires attention to something larger than what is between them. "Come in," she said. He came in. He told her everything, and when he was done, Clara Bennett sat with her hands flat on the desk and her jaw set and her eyes already moving across the map of Cedar Hollow. She kept on the schoolhouse wall, tracing the river, tracing the parcels, doing the arithmetic of what was at stake in the clear, unsentimental way she approached every problem that mattered. "The Delacroix farm is north of the Blackstone tributary," she said. "Yes." "So are the Aldridge parcels, and the Miller land." "Yes." She looked at the map. "She's going to try again," Clara said. "She's already here," Nathaniel said. Clara turned from the map and looked at him with those eyes that missed nothing. "What do you need from me?" she asked. And there it was. Not forgiveness, not warmth, not the restoration of what had been building between them before Lawrence Briggs and his easy recognition ruined a Tuesday afternoon. Just the plain, level-headed question of a woman who understood that something needed doing and was asking what her part in it was. Nathaniel told her. She listened. She nodded. She said, "All right. When do we start?" "Now," he said. "If you're willing." She looked at him for one more long moment, and in that look was everything unresolved between them, everything that was still raw and unfinished and waiting. And then she turned back to the map on the wall. "I'm willing," she said. They worked side by side for 6 days. Not comfortably. Not the way they had worked together before the truth came out, when there had been an ease between them that neither one had named, but both had felt. This was different. This was two people who had unfinished business between them, agreeing by unspoken consent to set it on a shelf and deal with something more urgent first. Clara was professional and precise, and she never once made Nathaniel feel unwelcome. She also never once let him forget by any small warmth or softened word that they were not back to where they had been. He respected it. He showed up every morning with whatever information had come overnight, and she received it with the same business-like attention she gave everything, and they mapped out Margaret Story's movements through Cedar Hollow, the way you map a problem on a schoolhouse wall systematically, without sentiment, looking for the shape underneath. What they found was more organized than either of them had expected. Story was methodical. She had divided Cedar Hollow into sections north parcels first, because those carried the water rights, then the eastern farmland, then the smaller residential plots on the town's edge. She was working through introductions via the local reverend, who did not know what she was actually doing, and had accepted her at face value as a county representative. She was using the church's trust as cover for her own, and the families she approached were exactly the ones who would have the hardest time saying no to someone who arrived with a reverend's endorsement. "She's smarter than Cole," Clara said on the third morning, looking at the list they had built. "Cole was a front," Nathaniel said. "She's the architecture. Can your letters stop her in time?" "The letters will get her operation investigated," Nathaniel said. "But investigation takes time, and she knows that. She's moving fast, because she knows if she gets enough signatures in the next 2 weeks, even an investigation can't unravel the transfers cleanly." He looked at the map. We need something faster. Clara looked at him. What's faster than a letter to the territorial commissioner? A letter to the territorial commissioner, plus a public record challenge filed at the county level, Nathaniel said. If we can document the misrepresentation she made to even one family in writing with witnesses, we can file a formal challenge to any deed transfer made under false pretense. That freezes the transfers until the challenge is resolved. How long does a challenge take to resolve? Months. Long enough for the investigation to catch up. Clara was already thinking. He could see it the particular focused quality of her attention when she was working through a problem's mechanics. The Delacroix family, she said. They have the revocation letter I wrote, and they have my signature as witness. Cole made verbal misrepresentations to them. Do we have enough to document the misrepresentation? If Mrs. Delacroix will testify to what Cole told her, Nathaniel said. In writing sworn. She will? Clara said. She told me exactly what he said. I wrote it down that same night. She went to her desk and came back with a folded piece of paper. I didn't know why I was keeping it. I just knew it might matter. Nathaniel unfolded it and read. It was exactly what they needed. He looked at her. You wrote this the night we sat at her kitchen table, he said. I wrote it before I went to sleep, she said, in case. He held the paper and thought about what it meant that she had been thinking ahead carefully, systematically. Without telling him on the same night, he had decided to start being honest and then failed to do it before Lawrence Briggs arrived with his easy voice and his 11,000 acres. Clara, he said. Don't, she said not unkindly. Not right now. Let's finish this first. He folded the paper. All right, he said. They went to see Mrs. Delacroix. Mrs. Delacroix signed the sworn statement at her kitchen table with the same quiet, firm handwriting she used for her household accounts. Her husband stood behind her chair with his arms folded and his jaw set, and when she finished, he said, What else do you need? Right now, this is enough, Nathaniel said. But if this goes to a formal hearing, we may need you to appear. We'll appear, Mr. Delacroix said. He looked at Nathaniel steadily. I was told you own land. Significant land. That's correct. Then you know what it means to a family when someone tries to take it from them under false pretense. I do, Nathaniel said. Delacroix held his gaze for a moment. Good, he said. Then we understand each other. They shook hands. On the walk back, Clara was quiet for a while. Then she said, You need to tell Frank. I already told Frank. I mean, tell him about Story, about the water rights, about what's at stake for his eastern parcels. She paused. He's the most respected man in this county after the Reverend. If Frank Aldridge stands up in front of this town and says something is wrong, people will listen before they sign anything. Nathaniel considered this. She'll move faster if she thinks people are turning against her. She'll move faster anyway, Clara said. She came herself because Cole failed. She's not here for a leisurely effort. She was right. She kept being right, and Nathaniel kept noticing it, and he kept filing it away with everything else he was accumulating about Clara Bennett. The sharpness of her, the discipline of her, the way her mind moved through a problem without vanity or hesitation. Frank tonight, he said. Frank tonight, she agreed. Frank listened to the full account with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the floor, the way a man listens when the news is serious and he wants to make sure he understands every word. When they finished, he looked up. She's staying at Hester's, he said. Yes. Right down the hall from you. Yes. And she doesn't know who you are. She thinks I'm a ranch hand, Nathaniel said. Frank was quiet for a moment. Then, that could be useful. Clara looked at Frank, then at Nathaniel. He's right, she said slowly. If she's still convinced you're not a property owner, she might say things around you she wouldn't say if she knew. I'm not comfortable listening at doorways, Nathaniel said. I'm not suggesting doorways, Clara said. I'm suggesting you stop avoiding the dining room. Nathaniel understood. Hester's common table, breakfast, supper, the natural conversation of a boarding house. She'll try to recruit anyone she thinks owns land, he said. Let her try, Frank said. Find out who else she's already talked to. Find out the timeline. He looked at Nathaniel. You said the water rights are the real target. How does she plan to use them? Sell them, Nathaniel said. There's a rail expansion being planned through this territory. The line is going to need water rights along a 50-mile corridor. If someone holds consolidated water rights before the rail company moves in, they can sell them for 10 times what the land is worth. He paused. She's not just running a fraud scheme. She's positioning for a rail sale. Frank was very still. How much are we talking? He said. For the full Blackstone tributary corridor, hundreds of thousands of dollars, Nathaniel said. The number sat in the room. Frank said quietly and specifically a word he did not usually say. Then he straightened. All right. What do we do? We file the challenge tomorrow, Nathaniel said. I'll ride to the county courthouse first thing. I'll file the Delacroix sworn statement and the documentation of misrepresentation. That freezes any transfer tied to Cole's operation. He looked at Frank. Your parcels were approached by Cole. They're part of the same operation. The freeze covers you. And the families she hasn't approached yet, Clara said. We need to reach them before she does, Nathaniel said. How many? Frank asked. Nathaniel looked at the list they had built. 11 families, north and east of town. She'll get to them in the next 5 days if we don't. Frank stood up. I'll start tonight. I know every one of those families. I can be at the first 3 before supper's cleared. He put on his coat. He stopped at the door. Nathaniel, he said. Frank, when this is done, and we're going to finish it, you and I are going to have a conversation about a certain fence you repaired for 20 cents an hour wages. He opened the door. I'm going to feel like a fool about that for a while. You shouldn't, Nathaniel said. You gave me honest work. That's nothing to feel foolish about. Frank looked at him for a moment. No, he said. I suppose it isn't. He went out into the dark. The county courthouse was 40 minutes by horse. Nathaniel rode out before dawn, filed the formal challenge at 9 o'clock. When the office opened, watched the clerk stamp the Delacroix sworn statement with the county seal, and rode back with the filed copies before noon. It was done. The challenge was in the record. Every transfer connected to Cole's operation was frozen pending resolution. He was back at the schoolhouse by 1 o'clock. Clara was in the middle of a lesson. He waited outside. When the students filed out at 3, he went in and set the stamped copies on her desk without speaking. She looked at them. Then she looked at him. It's done, she said. The Cole transfers are frozen, he said. Story is a different problem. Her approach is new enough that she hasn't made misrepresentations on record yet. We can't freeze transfers she hasn't attempted. But the families Frank spoke to last night, they know now. They know, Nathaniel said. 7 families. Frank got to all 7 before supper. Clara let out a slow breath. 4 more. I'll ride to the Miller farm this afternoon, and the 2 Garrity parcels on the North Road. That's 3, Clara said. The 4th is the Beaumont homestead, Nathaniel said. They're 12 miles north. I'll go tomorrow morning. Clara was quiet for a moment. She'll know something's happening, she said. She's organized. She'll notice that people are avoiding her. Yes, Nathaniel said. She'll accelerate. Which means she may try to approach someone tonight. Yes. Clara looked at the stamped documents on her desk, then at him. Be careful at supper, she said. Not warmly, but not without care either. The specific tone of a person who is not ready to be close to someone, but also cannot quite manage to be indifferent to them. I will, he said. He turned to go. Nathaniel, she said. He stopped. She picked up the stamped documents, held them. Her eyes were on the papers, not on him. Samuel showed me the ledger pages, she said. From your ranch. He said nothing. The discrepancy is in the 3rd quarter yields, she said. He found it in 2 days. She looked up. He's not going to say thank you to you directly. He's too much like me for that. But he worked on those pages for 7 hours straight, and he had a look on his face that I haven't seen since before our father died. Nathaniel stood at the door. "He's going to be formidable," he said. "I know," she said. And there was something in her voice then, private and complicated, and not meant for him exactly, but not hidden from him either. He left. He rode to the Miller farm and then to the Garrity parcels, and by evening he had 3 more families who understood what they were being offered and what it actually meant. And when he came back to Hester's for supper, Margaret Story was already at the table. She was charming. Nathaniel gave her that. She was the kind of charming that felt natural because she had been doing it long enough that it had become second nature. The warm question, the careful listen, the reflection back of what a person most wanted to hear. She had Hester half won in 20 minutes, and the other 2 boarders entirely won, and she was working on Nathaniel with the relaxed efficiency of someone who did not expect difficulty from a man in a worn shirt. "Are you from around here?" she asked him, passing the bread with a pleasant smile. "Passing through," he said. Standard answer. He had been giving it for 2 months. "Do you know many of the landholders in the area? I'm working with the county on a program for small property owners. A trust arrangement that can protect families from tax fluctuation." She said it smoothly with exactly the right amount of casual confidence. "I've met a few people," Nathaniel said. "What sort of work do you do?" "Ranch work." She nodded, filed him away as not useful, and turned her attention to the other boarders. Nathaniel ate his supper and listened. Over the course of the meal, he learned 3 things. The first was that she had already approached the Beaumont homestead, his 4th family, the one 12 miles north he had planned to reach the next morning. She had been there that afternoon. She did not say whether they had agreed to anything, but the satisfaction in her voice when she mentioned the visit suggested the meeting had gone the way she wanted. The second was that she was planning to host a meeting at the church hall on Saturday 4 days away. She described it as an informational gathering open to all property holders in the area. The Reverend had agreed to lend the space. The third was that she said at one point in a tone of passing certainty that she clearly did not think anyone at the table would understand the full weight of, once the rail corridor is confirmed, timing is everything. The first consolidated holder will capture the full value. Everyone else gets whatever's left. She said it to one of the other boarders, as if she were talking about weather. Nathaniel put down his fork. She had just confirmed the rail corridor. She had just confirmed that she knew about it and that she was working against a specific deadline, and that the deadline was the rail company's confirmation of the route. He excused himself from the table. He walked to the post office, which was closed, and stood outside it for a moment. Then he walked to the telegraph office, which was open until 8. He sent 2 telegrams. One to the Territorial Land Commissioner's office, urgent. Rail Corridor Water Rights Acquisition Scheme, active in Cedar Hollow. Request immediate hold on any consolidated transfer filings from this county pending review. One to the Helena First National Bank. Attention to a man named Whitmore, who handled Nathaniel's legal affairs. Need confirmation of rail route timing for Blackstone Corridor. Also need you in Cedar Hollow by Friday. Bring the land title documents. He walked back to Hester's. Margaret Story was still at the table, still charming, still working. Nathaniel went upstairs. He sat on his mattress. He thought about Saturday's church meeting. About 12 families and a woman with a smooth voice and a reverend's endorsement and a deadline she hadn't told anyone about. He thought about the Beaumont homestead 12 miles north and whether they had signed anything that afternoon. He made a decision. He was done being a ranch hand. He rode to the Beaumont homestead the next morning at first light. Thomas Beaumont was a man of about 60, with the particular stillness of someone who had been working land for 40 years and did not make decisions in a hurry. He listened to Nathaniel on the porch with his arms folded and his expression giving nothing away. When Nathaniel finished, Beaumont said, "You're telling me you own the Carter Ranch operation in Helena Valley?" "Yes." "And you've been doing fence work in Cedar Hollow for 2 months?" "Yes." Beaumont studied him. "Why should I believe anything you say?" It was a fair question. Nathaniel answered it directly. "You shouldn't take my word for it," he said. "I have the man coming from Helena on Friday who handles my legal affairs. He'll bring documentation. You can verify everything I've told you before Saturday's meeting." He paused. "But I need to know, did you sign anything yesterday?" Beaumont was quiet for a long moment. "She left a preliminary document," he said. "I told her I'd look it over." "Have you signed it?" "Not yet." Nathaniel felt the relief of a man who has been holding his breath. "Don't," he said. "Not until Friday. Will you give me until Friday?" Beaumont looked at him for a long time. "My wife liked her," Beaumont said. "The woman from the county." "She's very likable," Nathaniel said. "She said this program was designed for families like ours, small holders who needed protection." "I know she said that," Nathaniel said. "I need you to look at what the document actually says instead of what she told you it means. Those are two different things." Beaumont looked at the horizon for a moment. "Friday," he said. "I'll wait until Friday." Nathaniel rode back to Cedar Hollow. Thursday came, and with it the first crack in Margaret Story's composure. She came to breakfast looking like a woman who had received unwelcome information during the night, still polished, still controlled, but with a quality of tightness around her movements that had not been there before. She was shorter in her pleasantries. She excused herself from the table early. Nathaniel had a reasonable guess about what had happened. The county challenge was in the public record. Someone had told her. She now knew that the coal transfers were frozen, which meant she knew that someone in Cedar Hollow understood what was happening and had the legal knowledge to act on it. What she did not yet know was that someone was sitting at her breakfast table. He watched her go upstairs. He went to find Clara. "She knows about the challenge," he said when Clara opened the schoolhouse door. Clara took this in. "How long before she figures out it was you? She'll ask questions. Someone will tell her there's a man staying at Hester's who seems to know about land agreements." He paused. "Maybe a day, maybe less. Then we need the Saturday meeting to happen before she has time to regroup," Clara said. "If she cancels the meeting, the families who are going to show up will wonder why. That works in our favor. If she goes forward with it, we need to be there." "I'll be there," Nathaniel said. "So will I," Clara said. "Clara, if she's put together who I am by then, it could get confrontational." "I know," she said. He looked at her. "You don't have to. Those are my students' families," she said with the flat finality of someone ending a conversation. "I'll be there." He stopped arguing. Whitmore arrived Friday afternoon on the stage from Helena, precisely on schedule, with a document case under his arm, and the look of a man who has been on a stagecoach for 9 hours and taken it as a personal insult. He saw Nathaniel on the street and stopped. "You look terrible," Whitmore said. "Thank you, James." "The telegram said Cedar Hollow by Friday. You might have mentioned you were living as a ranch hand." "Would you have come faster?" Whitmore considered this. "Probably not." He looked around Cedar Hollow with the appraisal of a man unimpressed by frontier towns. "What do you need?" "I need you to be presentable at a meeting tomorrow morning," Nathaniel said. "And I need the Carter Ranch title documents and the Blackstone water rights registration." Whitmore opened his document case and handed over a sealed envelope. "Already pulled them," he said. "When a man sends an urgent telegram about water rights, you bring the water rights." He paused. "Also, the rail route was confirmed 2 weeks ago. They filed the corridor survey with the territorial office on the 15th. Nathaniel went still. 2 weeks ago," he said. "Confirmed route. The Blackstone tributary falls inside the acquisition corridor." Whitmore lowered his voice. "Nathaniel, the water rights on this tributary if someone holds consolidated rights across the northern parcels." "I know," Nathaniel said. "That's why we're stopping her tomorrow." Whitmore looked at him carefully. "We," he said. Nathaniel looked down the road toward the schoolhouse. "Come on," he said. "There's someone you need to meet." He brought Whitmore to Clara. He introduced them simply and let the situation explain itself, and he watched Whitmore, who had known Nathaniel for 15 years and was not easily surprised, recalibrate in real time as Clara walked him through the documentation they had built, precise and thorough and organized in the same way she organized everything, leaving nothing vague. When she was done, Whitmore looked at Nathaniel. "She put this together," he said. "We put it together," Nathaniel said. Whitmore looked at him with the particular expression of a man who has watched his client spend 5 years being extremely careful and is now watching something different happen. He said nothing. He was too professional for that, but he noted it. That evening, they went over the plan for Saturday's meeting. Whitmore would present the legal documentation. Nathaniel would speak to the land value question, the water rights, the rail corridor, what the families were actually sitting on. Clara would speak to the families directly because they trusted her and because she knew how to say hard things in ways that people could hear without shutting down. "She'll try to counter," Whitmore said. "She's not going to fold quietly. Let her counter," Clara said. "I want every family in that room to see exactly what she does when the scheme is exposed." Whitmore looked at her. "You've done this before," he said. "Not this exactly," Clara said. "But I've spent 4 years managing situations where someone with more power than me tried to make me accept something that wasn't right." She looked at the documents on the table. "I've gotten better at it." Whitmore nodded slowly. He looked at Nathaniel again. That same expression. Still nothing said. They went over the documents one more time. Saturday morning came hard and cold. The church hall filled faster than Story had planned for. Frank Aldridge had made sure of that, going door to door through the previous evening, telling every property holder in the county that there was something important they needed to hear at the 10 o'clock meeting, and being the kind of man whose word moved people to show up. Story arrived at the hall to find it already 3/4 full, and something shifted in her face when she walked in, a quick recalculation quickly suppressed. She looked around the room. She saw Frank Aldridge. She saw faces that had been warm to her earlier in the week and were now careful. She saw Nathaniel standing at the back of the room, and she looked at him the way you look at a thing that doesn't fit the category you put it in. And then she saw Whitmore beside him with the document case, and the recalculation happened again, faster and less suppressed. She looked at Clara. Clara was standing at the front of the room beside the Reverend, and she looked back at Story with the level, untroubled gaze of a woman who is exactly where she intended to be. Story took her place at the front of the room. She began her presentation. She was very good. Nathaniel had known she would be. She was organized and warm, and she made the trust arrangement sound like something between a county service and a personal kindness, and he could feel the room's attention being held by the sheer professional force of her presentation. She was 8 minutes in when Clara said, "Excuse me." Story paused. Clara said clearly and without aggression, "Mrs. Story, would you explain to the room what happens to their deed rights during the trust period, specifically who holds the deed?" A pause. "The trust holds the deed administratively," Story said. "For the benefit of who can dissolve the trust," Clara said. Another pause, fractionally longer. "The trust administrator under specific..." "Who is the trust administrator?" Clara said. Story looked at her. The room was very quiet. "That would be determined by the county. The trust administrator is Blackstone Consolidated Holdings," Nathaniel said from the back of the room. His voice carried without effort. "A private investment entity registered in Denver. Not a county body, not a public trust. A private holding company." The room turned to look at him. Story looked at him, and he saw it the moment she understood who she was actually dealing with. The moment the ranch hand she had filed away as irrelevant became something else entirely. "The rail corridor survey was filed 2 weeks ago," Nathaniel said, walking forward. "The Blackstone tributary falls inside the acquisition corridor. The water rights on your land. All 11 northern parcels are worth substantially more than you have been led to believe because they are in the path of the Pacific Northern Rail expansion. This trust arrangement does not protect you from tax fluctuation. It transfers your water rights inside a legal structure to a private entity that plans to sell them to the rail company." He set the Delacroix sworn statement on the table in front of Story. "This is a documented misrepresentation made by your representative Garrett Cole to a Cedar Hollow property holder. It is filed with the county. Every transfer Cole facilitated is currently frozen, pending a formal challenge." He set the rail corridor survey beside it. "This is the territorial corridor survey, filed October 15th. He set the Blackstone registration beside that. "This is the Denver registration for Blackstone Consolidated Holdings. Mrs. Story is listed as principal officer. The room was completely silent. Thomas Beaumont said from the third row, "She was at my farm Tuesday." Frank Aldridge said, "She was at mine on Friday." The Reverend, who had been standing to the side with the look of a man watching the floor give way beneath him, said, "She told me this was a county program." Story stood at the front of the room and said nothing. She was still composed. Nathaniel had to grant her that. She did not panic, did not reach for the papers, did not attempt a counter-argument. She looked at the documents on the table, and she looked at Nathaniel, and she looked at Clara, and she understood completely, and without illusion, that the room was gone. She picked up her presentation materials. She said to the room at large, "I advise you all to consult an attorney before making any property decisions." She walked out. The room was silent for a moment after the door closed. Then Thomas Beaumont said, "I'd like to understand what I was almost signing." Clara said, "Let me explain it from the beginning." And she did. For the next 40 minutes, she stood at the front of the church hall and explained in plain language that required no legal training to understand exactly what the trust arrangement had been designed to do, what the water rights were worth, and what the families in that room were actually holding. She answered every question. She asked Whitmore to clarify the legal points she was not certain of. She used Nathaniel's documents and the rail survey and the Blackstone registration, and she turned the whole complicated predatory architecture of the scheme into something every person in that room could see clearly. Nathaniel stood at the back and watched her work. He had known she was good. He had not quite understood until this moment what good looked like at full capacity. She was extraordinary. Not in a dramatic way, in the deep, sustainable, real way of someone who had been building this particular skill in difficult circumstances for 4 years and had arrived without announcement at a level of competence that could hold a room. When it was over, Frank Aldridge started the clapping. Everybody joined. Clara accepted it briefly and without embarrassment, and then said, "Talk to James Whitmore at the back of the room if you have specific questions about your individual land situation. He handles property law, and he's here through Monday." She came to the back of the room. She stood next to Nathaniel. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Then she said quietly, "She's going to find somewhere else." "Yes," he said, "but not here. And Whitmore's filing the full fraud report Monday. The territorial commissioner has the telegram. She won't find it easy anywhere." Clara nodded. The room was beginning to empty around them, people stopping to shake hands, to thank Clara, to introduce themselves to Whitmore. Frank Aldridge caught Nathaniel's eye across the room and gave him one slow, deliberate nod. Clara said still quietly, "What happens now, for you, I mean?" "I have a ranch," Nathaniel said. 11,000 acres. A manager who's been running it without me for 3 months. He paused. "I should go back." She said nothing. "But I don't want to go back without finishing something first," he said. She turned and looked at him. He looked back. "Not today," he said. "You've had enough today, but soon. There's something I need to say to you, and I need to say it properly, not in the middle of everything else." She held his gaze for a moment. "All right," she said. She turned back to the room where someone was waiting to ask her a question, and Nathaniel stood at the back of the church hall in his worn shirt and his cracked boots, and felt for the first time in 5 years like a man who was standing on level ground. It was unfamiliar. He intended to get used to it. The day after the church meeting, Cedar Hollow felt different. Not dramatically different, not the way a town feels after a fire or a flood when everything is visibly altered. It was quieter than that. The kind of different that settles into a place when something that had been building pressure underneath finally releases, and people can breathe again without knowing they had been holding their breath. Frank Aldridge told Nathaniel that 3 families had already come to see Whitmore on Saturday afternoon. 2 more came Sunday morning. By Sunday noon, Whitmore had a full accounting of every family. Story had approached every document she had left behind, and the precise scope of what had almost happened to Cedar Hollow's northern landholders. Margaret Story did not come to breakfast Saturday morning, or Sunday. Her room at Hester's was empty by the time the Sunday stage left at 7. She was on it. Hester stripped the room and remade the bed without a word on the subject, which was Hester's way of closing a chapter. Nathaniel watched the stage go from the front porch with his coffee and thought about what came next. What came next was the conversation he had told Clara he needed to have. The one that was not about the scheme, or the documents, or the rail corridor, or anything external. The one that was only about the two of them, and what was true between them, and what he had not yet been honest enough to say. He had told her soon. He needed to make soon into today. He set down his coffee and went to find her. She was at the schoolhouse, which did not surprise him. It was Sunday, and the school was closed, and she was there anyway, reorganizing the donated books from Billings into a proper lending system, because Clara Bennett used every available hour, and the concept of a day off had apparently never taken hold in her. He knocked on the open door. She looked up from the crate. "I was wondering when you'd come," she said. He came in. He did not sit down. He stood in the middle of the schoolhouse floor with his hat in his hands, and looked at her and said, "I need to tell you something that I should have said the day Lawrence Briggs opened his mouth in the street. I didn't say it then because I was a coward about it. I'm going to say it now." She set down the book she was holding, turned to face him fully. "I spent 5 years," he said, "building a system to protect myself from being hurt the way Victoria hurt me. I called it caution. I called it wisdom. I told myself I was conducting an experiment in human nature." He stopped. It wasn't any of those things. It was fear. Just fear. Dressed up in enough intellectual clothing that I could live inside it without feeling ashamed. Clara said nothing. "The journal," he said. 25 names. 25 times I watched someone fail a test they didn't know they were taking. And every time I put a name in that book, I told myself I was learning something true about people." He paused. "What I was actually doing was making sure I never had to risk being wrong. If everyone failed the test, I never had to try again. If the experiment proved that no one could be trusted, I never had to trust anyone." He looked at her steadily. "You didn't fail the test," he said. "You didn't pass it either. You did something I was completely unprepared for. You handed the money back, and you told me you didn't take charity from men you hadn't earned the right to accept it from. And I stood in that doorway holding an envelope, and understood for the first time in 5 years that the test I had been running said nothing true about anyone but me." The schoolhouse was very quiet. "I burned the journal," he said. Something moved across her face. "The night after Briggs," he said. "Not as a gesture, not for you to see. I burned it because I understood that as long as I kept it, I was keeping the architecture of my fear in written form, and I was done living inside that architecture." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this now?" she said. "You've already stopped the scheme. Whitmore's filing the fraud report. The families are protected." She tilted her head slightly. "You don't need anything from me to accomplish those things." "No," he said. "I don't." "So why?" "Because you deserve to know the full accounting," he said. "Not the version where I'm the man who helped stop a land scheme. The full version. The one where I came to Cedar Hollow to run a test on my 26th subject, and instead fell in love with a woman who never auditioned for anything in her life." The words landed and stayed. Clara did not look away. She did not move for a moment. Then she said, "That's the first completely unguarded thing you've said to me." "I know," he said. "It took you a while," she said. "Yes," he said. "It did." She picked up the book she had set down. Not to read it, just to have something in her hands while she thought. He recognized the gesture now. He had been watching her long enough to know what it meant when Clara Bennett needed a moment and didn't want it to look like a moment. "I'm angry at you," she said. "I want you to know that hasn't changed." "I know. Not at the money, not at the ranch or the land or any of that." She set the book down again. "I'm angry because you watched me, for weeks. You watched me struggle with that bank debt, and you knew you could resolve it in an afternoon, and you made a decision about what I needed without asking me what I wanted. That's the part that sits wrong." She looked at him directly. "Even if your intentions were good, you made choices about my life based on information I didn't know you had. That's not partnership. That's management." "You're right," he said. "I can't argue with that. I'm not going to try." "I'm not finished," she said. And there was something that was almost wry at the edge of it, as if she was aware that she had said that to him before. He waited. "I'm angry," she said. "And I know what I felt over those months. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what it was." She pressed her lips together briefly. "I noticed the step you repaired. I noticed the plate you left. I noticed the way you waited outside the schoolhouse for 40 minutes so I could finish with my students before you made me deal with you." She paused. "I noticed all of it, Nathaniel. I notice everything. You know that about me." "I know that about you," he said quietly. "What I felt was real," she said. "And what you apparently feel is—" She gestured slightly, acknowledging the word he had used. "What you said it is." She took a slow breath. "Those two things are true at the same time as the fact that you weren't honest with me. And I don't know yet what to do with all three of those things existing simultaneously." "You don't have to know today," he said. "No," she agreed. "I don't." He stood with his hat in his hands and looked at this woman who had held a family together with both hands for 4 years, and identified a land scheme in 20 minutes, and stood at the front of a church hall and dismantled it in 40. And he said, "I'm going back to the ranch. I've been gone 3 months, and my manager is a patient man, but I've tested his patience enough." He paused. "I'm not asking you to decide anything today. I'm asking you to let me come back." Clara looked at him. "Why would you come back?" she said. "Because you're here," he said simply. The simplicity of it seemed to land differently than anything complicated would have. She was quiet for a long moment. "Samuel's going to want to send back the corrected ledger," she said finally. "I know," he said. "He'll probably want to explain his method in detail, in writing. I'd welcome that." She looked at him one more time with those eyes that missed nothing. "Go take care of your ranch," she said. "Come back when you're ready to be a person instead of a man with a strategy." "That's already happened," he said. "Then come back when you can prove it over time," she said. "Not in a crisis. Not when there's something urgent that makes it easy to be your best self. Over ordinary time, Nathaniel. That's when it counts." He thought about Victoria. About what it meant to be loved only in the version of yourself that was certain. He thought about what Clara was asking for, not the dramatic version of him, not the man who stopped the scheme and stood at the back of the church hall, but the daily version. The ordinary version. The version that had nothing to prove. "All right," he said. He put his hat on. He walked to the door. "Nathaniel," she said. He stopped. She was looking at the crate of books from Billings, her hands resting on the top one. She did not look up when she said, "I'm glad you came to Cedar Hollow." He stood in the doorway. "So am I," he said. He left. He rode out the next morning before full light. Whitmore left on the Monday stage document case in hand, with a full accounting of the fraud and a mandate to file everything at the territorial level before the week was out. He shook Nathaniel's hand at the stage and said, "She's exceptional." "I know," Nathaniel said. "I've worked for you for 15 years, Whitmore said. "I've never seen you look at a problem the way you looked at her explaining water rights to 40 farmers." "That's not a problem," Nathaniel said. Whitmore smiled. "No," he said. "It isn't." He climbed into the stage. "Don't wait too long." "I won't," Nathaniel said. He watched the stage go. Then he got on his horse, and he rode north and east toward Helena, and the November cold came down hard and clean, and for the first time in 5 years, he rode through it without the journal in his inner pocket, and felt the difference in his chest, like something that had been clenched for a long time, finally beginning to open. The ranch was exactly as he had left it, which was a tribute to his manager Pete Halloran, who met him in the yard with the look of a man who had been expecting this return for about 3 weeks longer than it had taken. "You look different," Pete said. "Different how?" Nathaniel said. Pete studied him. "Like you slept." "I didn't sleep particularly well," Nathaniel said. "No," Pete said. "But you look like you stopped fighting it." Nathaniel unsaddled his horse. He spent the first week doing the work of 3 months, compressed the accounts, the seasonal contracts, the grazing agreements, the fencing schedules, the equipment inventory. He worked long days and came home tired and slept without the journal, and found to his genuine surprise that the nighttime quiet of the ranch no longer felt like the silence of a man alone, but something closer to the quiet of a man waiting. In the second week a letter came, Samuel's handwriting. Precise, economical, organized, in the same way Clara organized things, everything that needed to be said and nothing that didn't. The letter laid out Samuel's corrected analysis of the 6-quarter yield discrepancy with a clarity that made Nathaniel's actual accountant go slightly pale when he read it. The error was exactly where Samuel had said it was, and the correction was exactly right, and at the bottom of the 4 pages of calculation, Samuel had added in the same business-like tone, "Clara is reading more in the evenings. She seems well." SB Nathaniel read those 2 sentences 4 times. He wrote back to Samuel with a detailed response to the accounting methodology, and at the very bottom, in the same business-like tone, "I'm glad to hear it. Tell her the ranch looks better in November than it did in August." He sealed the letter. He thought about Clara reading in the evenings. He thought about ordinary time. The second letter came 3 weeks later, and it was not from Samuel. He recognized the handwriting immediately, not because he had seen it before in a personal context, but because he had seen it in the sworn Delacroix statement, and the revocation letter, and the notes she kept during their planning sessions, and he knew her handwriting the way you know the voice of someone you have been paying close attention to. Controlled. Precise. Nothing wasted. He sat down before he opened it. She wrote, "I told myself I wasn't going to do this for at least another month. I'm writing on day 19, which tells you something about my discipline, or perhaps about the lack of it when it comes to certain subjects." He felt something happen in his chest that was not quite a laugh and not quite relief, and was made of both. She wrote, "Samuel has been corresponding with your accountant about the yield methodology. I found them at the table together last Thursday evening, arguing cheerfully about rounding conventions. I want you to know, I hold you personally responsible for this development, and also that it is the best thing that has happened in this house in 4 years." He read the line 3 times. She wrote, "The county filed the fraud report. Whitmore sent a copy to the territorial commissioner and also to the Denver court, where Blackstone Consolidated Holdings is registered. I have been told there will be a formal hearing in the spring. Several families have been asked to provide statements. The Reverend has been mortified and has apologized to the congregation twice, which I think is sufficient." She wrote, "The Harmon boy passed his arithmetic examination with the highest mark in the class. He looked at his paper for a long time before he looked up. I don't think he had ever seen his own name at the top of something before." He sat with that for a moment. She wrote at the bottom of the page, after a space that suggested she had stopped and reconsidered and decided, "You asked to come back. I have been thinking about what I said, that I needed to see you over ordinary time. I stand by that. But I also think ordinary time can begin before you arrive, which is perhaps what this letter is." He read the last paragraph twice. Then he went and found Pete Halloran. "I need someone to run the operation for a week," he said. Pete did not look up from what he was doing. "Cedar Hollow," he said. "Cedar Hollow. I can run it for a month if you need." "A week," Nathaniel said. "For now." He rode into Cedar Hollow on a Thursday afternoon in early December, and the cold had settled in properly now, and the town looked the way it looked when winter had made its intentions clear, and people had adjusted their lives accordingly. He went to Hester's first. Hester opened the door and looked at him and said, "I'll put you in the same room." "Thank you, Hester." "The mattress still sags," she said. "That's all right," he said. He could hear her voice through the wall before he knocked the reading lesson voice patient and clear sounding out a word with a student who was working hard at it. He stood outside and waited the way he had waited before, because some things did not need to change. The school bell rang at 4. Students came out in a rush, coats being pulled on conversations already started. A few of them glanced at him curiously. The Harmon boy came out last and looked at Nathaniel and said with the directness of someone who had learned it from his teacher, "You're the man who helped stop the land scheme." "Partly," Nathaniel said. "Clara did most of it." "That's what she says too," the Harmon boy said. "She says you were the one who knew what questions to make us ask." "We figured it out together," Nathaniel said. The Harmon boy looked at him for a moment with the evaluating look that children sometimes have when they are deciding whether an adult is honest. Then he nodded and went on his way. The schoolhouse was quiet. Nathaniel knocked. A pause. Then her footstep, and the door opened, and Clara stood there and looked at him. She was not surprised. She was not exactly unsurprised either. She had the look of a woman who had been thinking about something and suddenly found herself standing inside it. "Day 19 of your letter," he said. "I'm here on day 41. I want you to know I calculated that very deliberately." Something moved across her face. "You're saying I wrote first." "I'm saying you wrote first." "I knew you were going to use that," she said. "I'm going to use it for a long time," he said. She stepped back and let him in. They talked for 3 hours that evening, sitting at the desks in the schoolhouse, because neither of them suggested a more comfortable location, and neither of them needed one. They talked the way two people talk when they have been communicating carefully and formally for 6 weeks, and are now able to say the things that do not fit in letters. He told her about the ranch. Not the acreage or the accounts, those were just numbers. He told her what it felt like to ride the eastern pasture in the morning, before the hands were up with the cold coming in off the mountains, and the land running flat and quiet in every direction. He told her about Pete Halloran, who had been with him for 12 years, and was the most reliable person he had ever known, and who had told him 3 times in 3 different ways not to wait too long. She told him about the Harmon boys' examination. She told him about Samuel's correspondence with Whitmore's accountant, which had escalated into a weekly exchange that Samuel was treating with the seriousness of a professional engagement. She told him about the 4 new books she had found at the back of the Billings crate that she had not cataloged yet, because she had been reading them herself first, which she admitted with the slight self-consciousness of a woman confessing to something that is technically not wrong, but is not quite what she told herself she would do. He laughed. It was a real laugh, not performed, not polite. A laugh that came from genuine delight. She looked at him when he laughed. She said, "You should do that more." "What?" "That," she said. "Whatever that was." "I was laughing at you hiding library books," he said. "I was reading them," she said. "Not hiding them." "You hid them under your desk." "That's where I keep things I'm currently reading." "Under your desk." "It's a very practical location," she said. He looked at her. She looked at him. And something settled between them that was not dramatic and not ceremonial. Just the quiet click of 2 people finding the register in which they were going to speak to each other for a very long time. He said, "I want to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth, even if the truth is not what I'm hoping for." She straightened slightly. "All right. The ordinary time you talked about," he said. "I have a ranch in Helena that needs me for significant portions of every year. I have business that takes me away. I have a life that is different from yours in terms of scale, I suppose. And I'm not asking you to fit yourself into that life. I'm asking whether there's a version of things where we build something that accommodates both, because..." He stopped and started again more plainly. "Because I am not interested in a version of my life that doesn't have you in it. I have been not interested in it for approximately 4 months since a morning at a water pump, when you told me that most people are better than they get credit for, and they're just scared." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "You remembered that," she said. "I remember everything you've said to me," he said. "Every word, since the beginning." She was quiet. She said, "Samuel needs to finish his schooling." "I know. I'm not leaving Cedar Hollow until he does." "I'm not asking you to." "The school here needs a teacher," she said. "I'm not leaving the school." "I'm not asking you to leave the school," he said. "I'm asking you to let me come back, regularly, as often as you'll have me, and to let me write in between, and let Samuel continue abusing my accountant's time, and let us build whatever this is over the ordinary time you were right to ask for." He held her gaze. "I'm not asking you to decide everything tonight. I'm asking if we're in the same conversation." Clara looked at him. She said, "We've been in the same conversation since you helped me carry a crate of books at 9 o'clock at night and didn't say a word more than was necessary." "Yes," he said. "We have." "I just needed you to know what conversation it was," she said. "I know what conversation it is," he said. She looked down at the desk in front of her for a moment. Then she looked back up. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. He waited. That morning at the pump, she said. When I said most people are better than they get credit for, and they're just scared. She paused. I wasn't talking about people in general. I was talking about you. He was very still. I'd been watching you for 3 weeks by then, she said. The step you repaired, the way you helped Frank, the way you sat at the far end of the table and never intruded. She met his eyes. I knew there was something you weren't saying. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was fear, and I wanted you to know that I didn't think less of you for it. He said quietly, You were telling me it was safe. I was telling you it was safe, she said. He looked at this woman, this extraordinary, precise, clear-eyed woman who had been watching him with the same attention he had been giving her, and had responded not with a test or a calculation, but with the simplest possible kindness. I didn't hear it, he said. I know, she said. You were still inside the walls. I'm not inside them anymore, he said. No, she said. I can see that. She stood up. She walked to the schoolhouse window, looked out at the December dark for a moment, and then she turned around. Come back at Christmas, she said. Bring nothing expensive. Bring something real. What does real look like? He said. She thought about it. Show Samuel the ranch, she said. He's been reading about yield accounting for 6 weeks and has never seen a working cattle operation. Bring him. Let him see what he's been calculating. She paused. And bring whatever it is you're like when you're not managing a situation. I want to meet that person. He stood. He's not very dramatic, Nathaniel said. Good, she said. I've had enough drama. He smiled. She looked at the smile and said nothing, but she did not look away from it either. Good night, Nathaniel, she said. Good night, Clara, he said. He walked to the door. He stopped. He turned back. Day 41, he said, for the record. I heard you the first time, she said. I know, he said. I'm going to keep saying it. She looked at him with those eyes that missed nothing, and this time there was no guard in them. No careful distance. Just the plain, honest, undefended look of a woman who has decided to let something be true. Good night, she said again softly. He went out into the cold. He came back at Christmas. He brought Samuel. He brought nothing expensive. He brought the eastern pasture at dawn, which he described to Clara on the second morning while the three of them sat at the ranch kitchen table with coffee, and which she listened to with the full attention she gave things that mattered. He brought Pete Halloran, who took one look at Clara and then at Nathaniel and made a decision that required no further discussion. He brought the ledger that Samuel had corrected, now running clean for 2 full quarters, which Samuel examined with proprietary satisfaction, and Pete Halloran acknowledged with the respect due a professional. He brought himself. Not the ranch owner, not the experiment runner, not the man with the journal and the walls and the 25 names. Just Nathaniel. The lonely cowboy from Helena, who had ridden into Cedar Hollow, looking like a man the world had already finished with, and discovered to his lasting astonishment that the world had not finished with him at all. On the last evening of the visit, Clara stood at the kitchen window of the ranch house, looking out at the land that ran in every direction under the winter stars. And Nathaniel stood beside her, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Then she said, "It's big." "Yes," he said. "Bigger than I imagined." "Does it feel like too much?" he asked. She thought about it honestly, the way she thought about everything. "No," she said. "It feels like something that could hold a lot of people." She paused. "A school. Out here. For the ranch hands' children. They'd need one." He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression of a woman who has already thought something through and is now simply reporting the conclusion. "You've been thinking about this," he said. "For about 48 hours, she said. "That's fast for you." "Some things don't need as much time as others," she said. He stood beside her at the window of his ranch house and looked at the land and thought about everything it had taken to get to this moment. 5 years, and a journal full of names, and a worn shirt and a saddlebag, and a woman who handed a brown paper envelope back through a doorway and told him she didn't take charity from men she hadn't earned the right to accept it from. He thought about what she had earned since. He thought about what he had. He said Clara. She said yes, not a question. Just the word open and direct the way she said everything. He reached into his coat pocket. Not for a journal, not for a letter. For a small thing he had carried from Helena. Not expensive, not dramatic. A ring that had belonged to his grandmother. Plain silver worn smooth from decades of use. The kind of thing that looked like exactly what it was, something real that had lasted. He held it out. She looked at it. She looked at him. She said, "You said nothing expensive." "It's not expensive," he said. "It's old. There's a difference." She looked at the ring for a long moment. He said, "I'm not asking because of the ranch. Not because of what you could do here, or what Samuel could become, or any outcome I've calculated. I'm asking because when I was pretending to be no one, you were the first person in 5 years who made me want to be myself again." Clara took the ring. She held it in her palm. She said, "I told you I needed to see ordinary time." "Yes," he said. 3 months of letters and 1 Christmas visit is not ordinary time, she said. "No," he agreed. "It isn't. So I'm going to hold on to this," she said, "until the ordinary time happens." She closed her hand around it gently. "And then I'm going to give you my answer." He looked at her closed hand, at her face, at the woman who had never once done anything that was not entirely on her own terms. "All right," he said. "You're not disappointed," she said. It was not a question she was reading him. "No," he said honestly. "This is exactly who you are." She looked at him for one long moment. Then she opened her hand and she put the ring on. She said, "The ordinary time starts now." He looked at the ring on her hand. He looked at her face. He said, "Yes, it does." She turned back to the window and he stood beside her, and outside the ranch land ran wide and cold and quiet under the Montana winter sky, and the stars were very clear, and Samuel was in the next room arguing cheerfully with Pete Halloran about sequential arithmetic, and the ranch house was warm, and there was nothing left to hide, and nothing left to test, and nothing left to prove. Nathaniel Carter had ridden into 26 towns looking for someone who would choose him when he had nothing. He had never understood until Clara that the problem was never whether someone would choose him. The problem was that he had never allowed himself to be chosen. She had fixed that. Not by passing a test, not by proving her virtue under observation, not by being the exception to a rule he had written in a leather journal that no longer existed. She had fixed it by being so completely and unapologetically herself that his walls had nothing to grip by handing back an envelope, by telling the truth at a water pump at 5 in the morning, by standing at the front of a church hall and dismantling a fraud scheme, with 40 farmers watching, by writing a letter on day 19 and calling it a lack of discipline. She had chosen him. Fully, clearly, on her own terms in her own time, with both eyes open and nothing owed. And that was the only proof that had ever mattered. Not that she stayed when he had nothing, but that she looked at everything he was and decided freely and without calculation that it was enough. That was the love that became a legend in Montana, not because it was perfect,